This is our only chance to talk, so Jamie and I just had a moment. Excuse us as you're just welcome to our marriage. So we're talking about becoming you and being more who God has created you to be. And I was thinking, it's kind of crazy the different transitions and the different parts of our life that we have. And last weekend, if you were here, Jamie got a chance, I thought did a wonderful job of sharing. Stop overcomplicating what God has called you to be. And it was a message I know I needed. But I was kind of thinking of the different seasons of life. And I was away with the kids, and we were at a family reunion. And this is like from my great-grandparents down. We ran out this 4-H camp, and we have this family reunion. And it's always kind of interesting because there's those cousins that you see all the time, and you kind of see their change. And then there's other ones that you see that you're like, oh, wow, you've changed a lot. Like my cousin's daughter, Emma, same age as Jackson, and has always been like 6-7 inches shorter than Jackson, all this stuff. And in walks, into the big dining hall, in walks their family. And in my head, I go, I wonder who the high schooler that they brought, like, who is that? Like, trying to figure out, like, how is she related to me, like, all this stuff. And then all of a sudden somebody's like, Emma, you're here. And I looked and I was like, oh, she's a grown woman. In 1 year, she went from a little kid to now a 6th grader that looks like, and it, right, like she changed, she transformed so much that you didn't even recognize it. It's that same transformation that happens when you see people, like maybe you've seen somebody that has lost a lot of weight. I remember my buddy Chris, when he lost a lot of weight at one point, we were going to an open house for a youth group kid that he hadn't seen in a while, and we're having all these conversations, and all of a sudden one of the dads went, oh, you're Chris. Like he didn't even recognize him, right? Like that huge transformation happened. And that same thing happens in our faith. And as we grow to become more and more like Christ, the people that are doing everyday life with us and are growing and walking through that, they don't see it because they see it every day. But then there's people that maybe you haven't encountered for a while, and you've changed so much of who you are and as a follower of Christ that when you get a chance to be together, they're like, oh, wait, you're kind of different now. And that's an okay thing. And I want to explain to you that being a Christian, that's one of the things that's difficult, is not falling back into the traps of the way that we used to be. As we change and we be more and more like Christ, we oftentimes fall into that trap of, well, I used to be this way, I used to act this way, I used to do these things, and now I no longer do them. And people kind of look at me a little strange or are confused by what has changed in my life. Why is this? And it's hard to explain, but you just know that you know when you're a Christian and as you follow Christ, you know. And the story that I want to share with you today is the story of Rahab. So I apologize beforehand for the rating on this sermon. Rahab was known as a prostitute. In the Bible, she was talked about as Rahab the prostitute. So if you have kids here that don't know what that word means, you can ask your parents later. Logan Crowder, I'll explain it to you later what a prostitute is. So we can have a one-on-one, right? So she was known as a woman that was not a good woman, right? She was a prostitute. And I don't know about you, but I would hate for me to be known as something that was like my worst possible sin or my worst possible thing that I was facing, right? Like whatever, John the whatever, this bad thing. I don't want to list all my bad traits right now. I'm sure you guys in your head are filling in the blank for me, right? Like we have those things of who you are. But so Rahab can be found, her story in Joshua. And what's going on is the Israelites people are close to entering the promised land. They know that they're going to come into the promised land that God has promised them. So Joshua sends 2 spies ahead to Jericho to examine the land. And they tell, and to find out who the people are that live there, what they can expect. Well, as these 2 spies are going around, they come across Rahab, and they sit there and they kind of interact with Rahab a little bit, and the king catches word that these spies are here. So they send to kill these spies or take these spies out. And so they go to Rahab, and Rahab covers for them, and she covers for them and hides them upstairs in the roof and tells the king, like, no, and sends them on a wild goose chase looking for these 2 spies. And after they all leave and she realizes that it's safe, we come to Joshua 2:9 where it says, I know the Lord has given you this land, she told them. We are all afraid of you. Everyone in this land is living in terror. For we have heard how the Lord made a dry path for you through the Red Sea. So she's talking about like God parting the Red Sea. She's heard about this when you left Egypt. She's heard about all these kings. She's heard about all the things that have happened along the Jordan River. She's heard about how God has completely destroyed all of this. And then we get to Joshua 2:11, which is the wonderful part. No wonder our hearts have melted in fear. No one has the courage to fight after hearing such things that God has done for you. For the Lord your God is the supreme God of heaven above and the earth below. Like she's telling these spies, like, I get it. Like, you're going to win. I know you're going to win because you serve a wonderful God. And so in this interaction that Rahab has, there's this wonderful part where she sits there and she says, will you just promise me? I will keep you safe, but will you promise me and my family? And the spies say, on our life, we promise you. Your faith that you now demonstrated to God and your courage of what you're doing, we promise we'll take care of you. So they send down this like scarlet thread off the back window where they climb down and get to safety and get back to Joshua and to tell him that the land is ours. So she has this entire great encounter where she has this moment. And I think it's so cool when you hear the story of Rahab, because here's Rahab the prostitute having faith, having an understanding, having a transformational moment because she sees how powerful God is. And she changes her entire life. And there's lots more to this story, but I think it's so amazing when you do that her story is then talked about later on in the Bible of just the power that she had in believing. So in Hebrews 11:31, it says, it was by faith that Rahab the prostitute was not destroyed with the people in her city who refused to obey God, for she was given a friendly welcome to the spies. So she gave this friendly welcome. She did God's work, and she was not destroyed for it. She followed God, and she followed that. But just we talk about Rahab in that transformation, right? Like Rahab the prostitute, Rahab this evil one, this bad woman, but yet her life changed as she followed God more and more. And I think the coolest part that can be found afterwards is one of the things that I think is so amazing. When you talk to people, when I walk through funerals with families or I walk through situations and you hear stories of what they went through at an earlier time in their life and how it's transformed them and how much better they were because of what they went through. And we see that, and we see this in Rahab's story, because I want you to follow along here. One of the coolest parts is in Matthew. And when you read Matthew, this part of Matthew is known as like the boring part of Matthew. The beginning of Matthew, it just talks about the lineage of Jesus. And I know as a kid, or even now sometimes I read through that and I gloss over like, oh, yep, the so-and-so is the father of so-and-so is the father of so-and-so. So it lists 42 men are listed as the descendants of Jesus, right? Like following down to Jesus coming, and we as Christians believe, right? Like Jesus came for our sins and died for our sins. Like the amazing part of that entire story is right there. But what gets mentioned and gets lost in there is 5 women. And one of those 5 women was Rahab. Rahab was in the lineage of Jesus. Rahab was whatever great-grandmother, whatever you want to call it, like of Jesus, the power in there. She gets mentioned, and she's no longer mentioned as Rahab the prostitute. She's mentioned as Rahab, the great whatever of Jesus Christ. The power of that, like, you hear the power of that? Her story went from being known as something so evil to now we're in the New Testament where her story is meant as something so powerful. Jesus transformed her life. That is our job as Christians. We want to be better. We want to follow Christ. We want to be more like him. So as you lean into becoming more who God has called you to be, as we lean into a church being called to something more than just being checking the box faith or just going through life. We're in the season now, and I think it's always a interesting season. I had a doctor's appointment this week, and I had a conversation, and there's a couple nurses, and they were all sitting there, and they were arguing what season is the best season. And one of the nurses finally looked and said, you know what the best season is? And I said, what is it? And she goes, the next season. It's always the next season, because we get excited about the next season. But also in the middle of that, we get fearful of the next season. A lot of people are going back to school. I know Meridian, you have another week, but Midland, like, people are going back to school starting this week, and it's a new season. It's a new beginning. You're going into a new grade. You have something you just really can't even understand what life's looking like. Some of those transitions, you're going from, maybe it was preschool and you're going to start kindergarten. Or maybe you're going to middle school for the first time. Maybe you're going to high school. I remember those transitions of the difficulty of that next season and that fear. The pure fear of what it was going to be like going into high school. And I had to be in a building for the first time ever with one of my siblings. That was going to be so difficult. Like, understanding those fears, those different things that you face. As a teacher, Jamie got her class list, and she talks about like the fear of going, here I have all these new kids and these new families that I need to get to know, and we're going to be a family in our classroom. We have that. Maybe it's just you've started a new job, or maybe your workplace, you have these different seasons and you have this fear, and we lean into that. We understand that. Bob Goff is a wonderful writer. I usually turn to his books when I really want to be encouraged. He's a great writer talking about just looking at our faith and looking at it differently. And this quote I found from Bob Goff: I think God sometimes uses the completely inexplicable events in our lives to point us toward Him. We get to decide each time whether we lean in toward what is unfolding and say yes, or we back away. This next season of life, this next challenge, this next part of becoming you, this next part of becoming what God has called you to be, we can either lean into that season or we can walk away from it. We can be afraid of it. We can be nervous for it. That's like so much of following Christ is so difficult in that, to understand that next season, what He's calling you to be, what He's asking you to be. And for you going into school, like asking you to be a Christian, asking you to be a follower of Christ. Maybe it's in a work meeting, asking you to demonstrate your love for Christ. Maybe it's just saying simple words like, hey, I'll pray for you about that. Or actually stopping and praying for a coworker. It could be so many different seasons. It could be going away to college and understanding and reinventing yourself. I always laugh because going to college was the one season you get to completely reinvent who you are, especially when you go farther away. When you go to Taylor, it's always funny because I don't know, Ryan, if they did this for you, but we got a book of like all the incoming freshmen at Taylor. And like it was a picture, all of our senior pictures. And you would go through and you'd get it in the summer and you're kind of flipping through like, okay, which of these people are going to be my friend? Who am I going to know? And you're going through all these different things. And I remember a kid, Troy. And I remember looking at Troy, and Troy had in his senior pictures, if you can imagine with me, I tried to actually find my Taylor, whatever they called that magazine. Surprisingly, I don't have it anymore. But he had like a sweater vest on that was plaid, and he had like a bow tie, and his hair was like parted on the side. And we're all like, oh yeah, and I looked and I was like, oh, because we got the list, he was down the hall from me. So I'm like, I got to see this kid, like Poindexter, whatever you want to call, like whoever this kid is, and I want to see him match up. So my roommate and I went down there and we went in his room, and in, the room is this kid that has blonde hair, spiked, and he has a polo shirt, popped collar, because that's what we did, completely like nothing like his picture. And we're all like, wait, but your picture? And he's like, yeah, I felt like this was the time to change who I was. And we just had that moment of like, oh yeah, like you have those seasons to restart. You have those seasons to start over, that refreshment. And Jesus is asking you, are you going to lean into that? I'm not saying this is like you completely makeover wardrobe, but this is a wardrobe in your heart. Like this is changing who you are in your heart. Are you willing to completely change who you are because you know it's who God has called you to be? Are you willing to be those tough situations? Are you willing to be a different person that you know Christ has called you to be? Because becoming more and more like Christ is not an easy thing, but it's a very rewarding thing. It's a very encouraging thing to lean into that. So my take-home point for you today, if nothing else is really just hit, I want you to know this. We change because our relationship with Jesus, not because of this world. So if you're changing who you are, if you're being better Christian, if you're being a better man or woman of Christ, that should be because of our relationship with Jesus, by spending time with Him, by reading the Word, by being in groups, spurring each other on. But if your change is happening because of the world, that's not the right reason to change. If you're changing because the world is telling you you need to be something different or better, that's not where our hope comes from. That's not what being a Christian comes from. We change because we have a relationship with Jesus. We change and we celebrate becoming who we are. So I want to take a minute. I know they absolutely hate that I do this before the school year starts. I want to take a minute and just ask if you are, I never force the college kids to do it, so you don't have to, but if you are going to be a student going into preschool, elementary, junior high, high school, or if you're a teacher of any of those, I'm going to ask you to come up on the platform for a second. I'm looking at my wife. You are a teacher. You're going to start a school year. Because I think this is an important part of us as a church for praying for these kids, praying for these students. And I always get chills watching all of them up here. I'm sorry, Brian, I don't know if you have a wide enough panoramic view. Probably not. Yes, there are some teachers back here that are not coming up, but I'm not calling any of them out because I know not to call a teacher out. Because I'm married to one and it goes bad. You guys can pack in. I know, I love it. Scoot back. If you're taller, if you're shorter, come to the front. Pack in. You all hate me. This is the only time I'm going to make you all hate me. That's a lie. Isn't this exciting, church? Like, seriously, is this not? So in the next 2 weeks, I won't say everybody, these kids are going to be going back to school. And my hope and my prayer, getting emotional, is that they're going to be able to show Christ in a unique way. And I would love to take time, but we don't have that much time, to have them all share their favorite story or whatever of how they're going to show Christ. We got more coming up. This is so exciting. But my hope and my prayer for them, of all generations, of all ages of these kids, they're going to be, and you know, those that think back to school, how difficult that season was. And it's hard as a teacher, it's hard as a student to show Christ. It's hard to demonstrate Christ because sometimes you feel like you're by yourself. You feel like you're the only Christian in your entire school, which is ironic as I'm looking out and seeing two people that went to high school with me. But you feel, right? You feel like you're the only person that's a Christian in your school. You feel like a lonesome person. And I wanted to take a minute that we as a church are going to pray over them, but also for them to realize that they're not alone. Because they have a church that loves them, that is going to be praying for them, but they have so many other people that are up on the stage with them. So church, will you pray with me over these kids and these teachers right now? Dear Heavenly Father, I just pray for these students. I pray for these teachers. I pray that you will just watch over them. Give them an amazing school year where they will demonstrate your love that you've given to them. May they not feel alone. May they not feel by themselves, God, because one, they have a relationship with you, but two, they have so many other friends and so many other people that are up here that are worshiping with them and walking through life and are going to be there and going to be in their corner with them, God. I thank you for a chance to celebrate them today, and I pray that you just watch over them and give them a very special blessing. And be encouraged that you will go before those fears that they have, and you'll be with them in those successes and celebrate those with them. It's in your strong and powerful name. Amen. Thank you for hating me. You guys can go back down to your seat now. But you got to give me some of your snacks. I'm just kidding, Cal. Let's give them a round of applause like we've been celebrating.